Lawrence Lessig has been called the Dean of Cyber Law. He has been a pioneer in the emerging field, taking on a number of controversial issues, including Microsoft, Napster, copyright and software patent laws. He is currently a professor at Stanford Law School, where he's also the founder of the school's Center for Internet and Society. His most recent book is called The Future of Ideas, and I am pleased to have him here. Subtitle, I assume, The Fate of the Commons in a Connected World?
That's right.
And the other book was called Code and Other Laws of Cyberspace. First of all, it's great to have you here.
Thanks.
You know of my interest in technology and also ideas. Let me just pick up on a subject we were talking and just dive right into it, and it has not something to do with the book, but something. I interviewed Steve Case, and I raised a question that you had said about AOL Time Warner, which is, you said, and I picked it up from a piece that Ken Letter quoted you and written about AOL Time Warner. And in fact, the point was that you wonder if AOL Time Warner, as it gets bigger and bigger, as so big as it is, will be resistant to new ideas because they may threaten them, you know. Tell me what you meant by that, and tell me, and I have some other questions.
Well, so the thing that motivated me to write this book was that as a lawyer, I spend my life studying constitutions, and the internet has at its core a kind of constitution, and that constitution is that the network itself can't control what people do on the network. It can't decide which content flows or which applications run. It was designed to be neutral. And the internet, originally, under that design, inspired extraordinary innovation, and the next great idea could take off because the design made it impossible for anybody to stop this next great idea. Now, what concerns me about the future and what made me write this book is that people looked at that design, the original internet, and they said, we don't like this feature of the network, that we can't control how stuff flows or who gets access to what. And what we've seen in the development in the last couple of years is a slow transformation of this network into one where the network owners increasingly can control access and flow of content in a way that threatens this initial set of values, this constitutional values of the original net. And so my concern is, though I think AOL has been an extremely important player in bringing the internet into everybody's life, in the future, what is their game plan? Is their game plan going to be to keep this open, neutral platform where people can get access to Disney content as easily as they get access to Time Warner content? Or is their game plan to build this network so it prefers their content or makes it hard for people to get outside to other kinds of content, and in essence violate or corrupt a fundamental principle of what the original network was?
And what do you believe?
You know, I love AOL, but the fact is, if you look at the structure of the business, it's not natural for them to be the good guys in the future. And though I get in a lot of trouble for saying this, and I've only said it a couple times, if you look at the structure of the business, the bad guys of yesterday might be the good guys of tomorrow. Microsoft might actually have, in the long term, a stronger interest in preserving the network that keeps innovation open than these other media conglomerates.
And the irony of that is clear to all, which was that Microsoft had not built its reputation on opening up its source code and all the rest of the stuff.
Right, but Microsoft took off because they built a solid platform, first the DOS operating system, then the Windows operating system, that lots of people could build on top of, lots of people could innovate. It was a neutral, good platform for innovation. They got in trouble when they started using their power to protect themselves against new competition. So the first case in the early 1990s was about using their power to protect themselves from new operating systems that either would have Windows attached to them or not. And the recent case was using their power to protect themselves against the emerging internet and the potential for innovation that the internet presented. Now, I think that practice of using your power to protect yourselves against the next great idea is what harms innovation, and so I think the government was right to bring a lawsuit against them. But again, if you look at the future and you look at their game plan and how they want to build the network out and what .NET could be, I'm not saying it will be, but could be, they actually might have the best interests of innovation at their heart against a lot of other big players who don't.
Let's stay with AOL Time Warner. Has Steve Case, because of the merger with Time Warner, in your judgment, changed his attitude about issues like this?
You know, I can't tell. I mean,
he was all for openness when when he was at AOL Time Warner.
Right, and AOL and
when he was at AOL.
Right, AOL was a strong strong supporter of open access for cable. So they came to California and they told San Francisco, if you don't keep cable open and allow competitive ISPs to connect, what you'll have is the existing cable owner exercising control to destroy this platform for innovation, this neutrality. Then when they bought Time Warner, proving that you are what you eat, all of a sudden they were no longer interested in the government making sure the network was open. They were interested in letting the, quote, market take care of itself. And the concern there is the market will take care of itself, that the network owners will architect this so that it protects themselves against competition. And that's the consistent theme of my anxiety in this book, the number of areas where that is happening right now, and the basic lack of political will to resist this kind of corruption of this.
Show me the exhibits that you use to make the point.
Right. Well, cable is the easiest case, right? So originally the internet was born on telephones, and the telephone companies were regulated to be neutral, so that you wanted to use your telephone line for access to a computer, the telephone company couldn't tell you you can't. That was a set of regulations that actually changed the way the telephone company behaved compared to the way it behaved earlier in the century. And it was that set of regulations, I think, that made it possible for this new network to be layered on top of the telephone network. Now, as the internet moves from telephones to cable, the same rules don't govern cable. There's no requirement of neutrality, there's no requirement of non-discrimination, there's no kind of common carrier-like regulations. And that means that the cable companies can begin to architect access to cable internet access fundamentally different from the way the internet originally was architected. So there's a technology called policy-based routers. These are the technologies that determine how you flow on the internet. They can be tuned to make it so some content flows more quickly, other content flows slowly. It's like a television set where channel 6 comes in clearly, but channel 12 has static, and it just turns out that the telephone manufacturer also owns channel 6.
Yeah, right.
Now this is the possibility of the technology here, and this is the way it's going. And my real concern is this administration, and in particular Michael Powell at the head of the FCC, really believes in liberating these cable companies and telephone companies to engage in precisely this kind of discrimination. And my concern is that this will slowly change the internet, which had extraordinary opportunity for a different kind of creativity and innovation, into a kind of cable television. It would be much better than cable television, but still not the constitutional value of open and universal access.
And what will determine if that happens?
I think that there's a policy decision here. I think this is public policy. Just as the government had a policy of building highways that were open and neutral, the government ought to have a policy of building this information highway that's open and neutral. When we built the highways, when Eisenhower built the highways, he didn't call up GM and say, you build the highways and we'll allow you to build it so GM trucks run well but Ford trucks run poorly. I mean, the idea was obvious to them that the government has a role to make sure that this basic infrastructure remains in a commons, remains common and openly accessible by all. And if you corrupt that, if you sell that value by saying you're allowed to make this non-neutrally or make this so it prefers you, that just inhibits the opportunity for the next great idea to take off.
Okay. Other exhibits that would prove this point?
Well, the other big example is the way that content owners or copyright holders have used the power of copyright law to stop a certain kind of innovation that the internet made possible. Now, it's important to qualify this because people want to make this into a very simple debate. If you're pro-Napster, that means you're pro-theft, and if you're pro-theft, you're anti-American. Right. So it's either American or anti-American.
Right. Or if in fact you're pro-copyright, you're anti-technology.
Exactly. Right. And the fact is that the debate is obviously much more complicated. That copyright law, which we have to remember is a government-backed monopoly. Right. It's a government regulation of the innovation process, has grown dramatically over the last 200 years. The framers created a copyright law that lasted for just 14 years. It covered maps, charts, and books. It could be renewed if the author was alive, but it only protected against basically republishing the same work. So if you wrote a book, I could set it to a play or set it to a movie. They didn't make many movies in 1790, but still the idea was there. These ideas were free. They were unregulated, right? That was an essential part of our framers' vision of what intellectual property, as we've called it, was. That you had a limited incentive for people to produce, and then stuff went into the public domain as quickly as possible. Now, in the 210 years since that, we've grown copyright law dramatically. So now it's not 14 years renewable once. It's the life of the author plus 70 years. So for somebody like Irving Berlin, that's 140 years of protection. It covers not just things that you register, but basically every creative act when it's reduced.
But in saying this, in pointing this out, are you suggesting that the copyright law ought to be reduced to a shorter span?
I think in a number of places it should be cut back. Now, I wouldn't go as far as our framers. I wouldn't say it should be as limited as that. But the problem with it being as big as it is that when a great new technology comes along, these relatively concentrated industries, for example, the music industry, where 5 companies control basically 85% of the distribution of music in the world, are able to protect themselves using their collection of copyrights against this new technology, which offered not just cheap ways to get access to music, that's not the important part of what Napster and MP3.com promised, but offered a brand new way for authors and musicians to produce content, to create competition in the way that musicians distribute content and promote content.
And their argument on the part of people like Napster and others was, that people who could not get produced by those who control the business now had a way to produce.
Right. This is the general message of digital technology across the board, that whereas in the old days, these relatively concentrated industries may have made sense, we now have an opportunity to be creators and inventors.
Every person a creator.
Yeah, well, I'm not that romantic about it. I want to watch what everybody produces, but the point is we don't have a justification for this concentration of yesterday. And if the internet were left open for this kind of creativity, you would see not 10 million new artists out there, but you'd see many more new artists out there and new ways to promote artists that would actually, I think, benefit artists.
Are you in this book and in your, you said this is the depressing book, are you reading a eulogy at the funeral, or are you trying to call to arms for one last battle?
It depends what day it is. Sometimes I want to say there's a call to arms. And on the other days, it just seems to me that the struggle is so big and the interests are so strong, and people don't want to talk about what made this special.
If you had this conversation with Bill Gates, which you may have had, what would he say?
Well, I think Gates would get this completely.
There's
a wonderful part in the book where I talk about software patents, and the first part of the quote is Bill Gates talking about how crazy it is that software is patented. Like nobody who was developing the software would ever have expected it could or should have been patented it, and that what this will do will be to inhibit innovation in all sorts of ways. And then in a footnote, I continue his quote where he goes on to say, and so therefore what we need to do is get into the business of software patents very vigorously so that we can protect ourselves against a new kind of competition. I think Bill Gates, at the stage of his life where he sees he's built an extraordinary platform for innovation. He gave the world, I'm not saying he gave the world the internet, but he gave the world a huge part of what made the innovation of the internet possible, should be able to recognize what made that great. And what made that great was a neutral, open platform. And I think his heart should be in favor of preserving that neutrality in the context of the internet.
But where is his heart?
Yeah, it's a good question.
You know?
I don't know.
You don't know?
I don't know. I read different accounts. I think the company's actually split. I think there are two sides to it.
And does Linux impact on this question?
It does. Right, so it's a nice competition to the Microsoft operating system that in its very design embraces a set of values that assure that no single entity could ever control it, that its source code, the stuff that people write when they write the programs, is always open for other people to take and develop as they wish.
Who was Bettina?
Bettina's my wife.
My teacher of the most important lesson,
right.
Which was that believe
this lesson of love, which is something that has been an extraordinary part of the last 2 years.
I don't know quite where I want to go here, because there is because it goes back to my question as to whether we should simply sit here in mourning or whether there is, and how the battle will be carried out. So if there's a call to arms, you know, is the battle to be taken, you know, should you mount up and charge Washington, or should you do something else?
Well, so in the moments where I think there's a reason to wage a war, to a battle, right? With the moments when when you can see how this is not really a left-right issue. Like the last chapter of my book is titled "What Orrin Understands."
Right.
It's the story of Orrin Hatch.
Right.
Now, I think Orrin Hatch is a great senator. He and I share about zero as far as political affinity. But on the critical issues of the internet, in the last 5 years, Orrin has been on the right side on two of the important issues, in the Napster case and in the Microsoft case. In both cases, he's not been a rabid, let's destroy the music industry or let's destroy Microsoft, but he's been a voice of balance that says, let's make sure that the dinosaurs can't control evolution. Let's make sure that the winners of yesterday don't stop the winners of tomorrow. And so he's, you know, waged a tiny little battle in both of these contexts to try to make sure that innovation is kept open. Now, when you get people to see that this is not about leftism versus right-wing politics, but this is about old versus new, I think there is some kind of rally that could cut across traditional political lines and get people to see that we need to preserve the openness of the internet, not just because it will enable lots of non-commercial creative activity, but also because it would enable the next great AOL, the next great Microsoft to take off and to become extraordinarily successful in a commercial venture. It's neutrality that's important.
Do you have any idea who who has the potential to be the next AOL or the next Microsoft?
I think the next great success are technologies or people who figure out how to connect people in amazing ways. Now, you know, we've just begun to see this. Instant messaging and email, and all of us now try to hide from this stuff because we don't want to be connected in just that way. But these technologies enable the building or the recreation of a kind of community, right? A kind of way that people interact. And when people interact in the community, it's not just that they sit together and talk about public policy issues. They also create together. They also play together. They also, you know, teach each other things. This sort of stuff we used to do, or at least small towns used to do 100 years ago. This stuff gets re-enabled in the context of a really free and open end-to-end peer-to-peer network. I think that's where real excitement is going to happen. Now, that's very different from this model of, you know, having 10 million channels of cable TV available to you at any one time. It's about people participating in creativity as much as it is that them receiving and watching stuff that gets produced. And if you look at the gaming culture, I think the one rule is look for the thing that looks most absurd to you, us here. Right. I'm not saying you. And then that's where you'll find the next great innovation. So look at the fact that people spend 30 or 40 hours a week sitting there in these extraordinarily intricate text-based or virtual world-based games with people they've never met, not necessarily destroying each other, but also building communities with each other, right? And that energy and that excitement, I think, signals something about what this next generation is going to demand out of interconnected networks, an ability to rebuild community that my grandmother would have recognized as the kind of sort of community she grew up in.
You have come a long way from being a student of philosophy.
Yeah.
Yet at the same time, you haven't really left it.
That's right. Yeah.
You know? I mean, it's interesting.
Right. I mean, my first work in the law was in Eastern Europe and in Russia, where I was doing, just after the fall of the wall, we were working with people talking about building new constitutions in those countries. And constitutionalism in Eastern Europe seemed to me exactly like the kind of constitutionalism that I wanted to talk about the internet, because in both cases, we're talking about how to structure space so that some sort of democracy can take off.
I hate to change the subject to something so practical because I love the poetry of what you just said, but I meant to mention this earlier. The Microsoft antitrust suit, where is it going to end up in the end, you think? I mean, look at the turn it just took.
Yeah.
When the decision came down, everybody said Microsoft has won the day. Well, the attorney generals of the different states are hanging in there.
The federal government has settled with a settlement that I think is fatally flawed. it's flawed because there's no enforcement mechanism, right? So there's this very complicated legal document which is supposed to guide 20,000 aspects of Microsoft's business for the next 5 years. But if there's a disagreement about what this document means, the only way to resolve it is to go back into court. Now, the case that I was involved with, that began in 1997, it took the court 10 months to resolve the meaning of 20 words. Right? If it takes 10 months to resolve the meaning of 20 words, then there's no way this decree will ever be enforceable. Right? So there was a completely obvious remedy to that problem, which is what the remaining states have pushed for, some kind of special master who's able to enforce the decree. But I think that's the flaw in this particular decree. And I think it's such a lost opportunity because, again, I think it's possible, not likely but possible, that Microsoft could be turned in the direction of defending the most important values of the Internet. And this settlement, or this decree, I thought, could actually help bring that about because, you know, they're businessmen. So if you make it so it's too costly for them to continue to engage in one, they'll go the other way. Right. And if the other way is towards freedom and openness, then we all win. But by failing to carry through to the last point on this particular decree, I think it still is within Microsoft's power to choose which way they want to go. They want to continue down the old path, or they want to really push the values of the new. Now, people trust Microsoft, have all sorts of faith in Microsoft. I'm not on that camp, but I do think that we've lost a great chance here to turn this into something really valuable for the future of the Internet.
Yeah, to make sure they take the right direction.
Right, and they, in a sense, become defenders, the good guys of the future. No, it's astonishing to me that the government has failed to do this.
But by definition, you believe AOL Time Warner is going to be the bad guy of the future?
Not by definition. I don't think it's in their genes, but I think it's in the structure of the business.
I mean, in the power is what I mean.
Yeah. I think in the structure that they have, the connection between content and conduit now, and in the AOL system, which is largely about architecture of control, they have all the temptation to go in that direction. And they, there isn't really a business model they've described which embraces the values of the original Internet the way Microsoft does.
Why? This is called The Future of Ideas, The Fate of the Commons in a Connected World, Lawrence Lessig. And the other book was called Code and Other Laws of Cyberspace. Why do we have what looks to me like a mousetrap? Is it a mousetrap?
It is a mousetrap. And, this is the one part of writing a book that the author has nothing to do with. But I understand it to be, will we have the next great idea, the build a better mousetrap, the opportunity for this in the future.
Right. That's what I understand it to be, too.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Pleasure.